started. So I hope you had a great lunch and had some caffeine after that. And I'm sure we have an exciting panel and a great keynote over here. So they will keep you awake. First of all, before we get started, my name is Naveen Bisht. I'm the content chair for TiEcon. And of course, this track wouldn't have been possible without our chair, Raj Masruwala, highly successful entrepreneur you might have heard in this morning. He had brought in our grand keynote, and he introduced this morning also Bharat Desai. And so basically it's Raj's brainchild of the whole track, and putting together a great panel as well as bringing our keynote here. And also with Raj, there are a number of volunteers, Vu, Rama, and Siri. I don't know where they are. Could we please? They were really helping Raj with everything. So let's give them a big round of applause. So what I would like to do is introduce Raj, another Raj Gulamudi, who is going to be introducing keynote as well as the moderator for the panel. Raj himself is a successful venture capitalist, but at this time he's working with this social venture capitalist firm called Omidyar Network. He's an investment director. So if anyone has any ideas, please don't let him get out of here before he writes you a check. So with that, I'll like to have Raj on the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you, Naveen. And again, thank you, Raj, for all the hard work in putting this together. So I wanted to take just a few minutes and tell you a little bit about Omidyar Network, where I work, and then lead you on to Nipun, where he can share his insights with us. So Omidyar Network is a very unique organization. We call ourselves a philanthropic investment fund. It was founded by Pierre Omidyar, who's the founder of eBay, and it's funded entirely from his individual net worth. And we are an interesting organization in the sense that we are both a foundation that does nonprofit grants to nonprofit organizations across the world, and we're also a venture capital fund where we do equity investments like a typical VC. But the thing that drives our activity across all those types of organizations across the world is social impact. So what we look for is entrepreneurs, organizations that are using technology in some way to empower individuals. And what we look for, what we measure, what we care about the most is social impact. And what social impact is a very long topic for discussion, but maybe we'll touch on some of those in the discussion following Nipun's presentation. But what we look for is social impact, and it's different in different countries. We are about 80 people worldwide, 40 people here in California, and then the other 40 spread across our offices in Washington, D.C., in Mumbai, India, London, Johannesburg, Mexico City, and we'll probably have an office in probably in Brazil or Colombia later next year. We have deployed about $600 million over the last 4 or 5 years. Roughly half of that has been in nonprofit organizations, and the other half is in traditional early stage VC. Again, it makes us quite unique. So what I think is interesting about how we go about what we do is oftentimes people, when they think about NGOs, nonprofit, the social sector, there's this notion, which I'm hoping that we dispel by the end of the session. There's this notion that it's for charity, sort of giving money away. Right? And I think what we think about at Omidyar Network when we think about social entrepreneurship or impact investing, as it's called in some circles, is it's sort of entrepreneurship first. Entrepreneurships have, depending on no matter what the country or what the sector, they all have certain characteristics of them. They find big problems that they want to solve, and they want to go attack it and solve those problems. So we are looking for entrepreneurs that are addressing big problems and are solving them in innovative ways. And sometimes it's low tech, sometimes it's high tech, sometimes no tech at all. But it's really solving big problems. And the other thing that we really care about a lot is scale. So we talk about scale, we talk about impact at scale, and that forces you to think about things that VCs think about here in the Valley all the time, which is, do you have the right team? Are you going after a big enough market? Do you have the right resources in terms of talent and money? Are you set up for scale? Are you constantly innovating and looking for breakthrough innovations in both in terms of technology and business model? and so on and so forth. So we're looking for impact at scale. We're looking for talented organizations, entrepreneurs across the country, across the world. We have investments in Sub-Saharan Africa. We have investments in India, Bangladesh. We are quite active we're becoming more active in Latin America. We have a few investments now in places like the Philippines and Indonesia. So a very global footprint. But again, the thing that is common across all these is the social impact. So anyway, that's enough about me. Would love to now introduce Nipun Mehta, who is the founder of ServiceSpace. And he asked me not to go into too much of his personal background, so I will let him share with you his insights and we'll come away, I'm confident, inspired by his, I think, a very unique and innovative way to tap into this desire in all of us to live a more purposeful, mission-driven life. And each of us can engage with in that field in our own way, depending on our own circumstances. So I really love what Nipun's doing and sort of the approach he's taken to focus and leverage what he's been, what all of us have, at least all of us in this room, because we've sort of self-selected by coming here, and find ways to sort of tap into that inner desire. So Nipun.
Pleasure to be here. I was looking at this word social entrepreneurship, which is what brings us together, and I realized that there are two ways of looking at it. One is social first, and then entrepreneur, and the second is entrepreneurs who are kind of social. They kind of see social as a byproduct, and I want to talk about the difference between the two today. This is Reid Hoffman, CEO of LinkedIn in the Wall Street Journal. He says social networks do best when they tap into one of the 7 deadly sins. Facebook is ego, Zynga is sloth, LinkedIn is greed. I think he's right. Except entrepreneurs who are social say, look, this is just how the world is, and let's work in that pie. But social entrepreneurs look at that and say, look, capacity of human beings is much greater than that, and let's build a bigger pie. And let's see how people respond to different kind of incentives. I want to talk to you about 2 social entrepreneurs whom I've had the privilege of meeting and who are remarkable people, and they've created remarkable social change in the world. Most of you might know them. One is Dr. V. At the age of 58, he's crippled with rheumatoid arthritis, and he says, I want to go out and serve. What should I do to go out and create impact in the world? And he finds out that there's a lot of people in the range of millions whose life would be completely altered with a 30-minute cataract surgery. They're blind, they get a cataract surgery, now they can see, and the whole world is a different place. He decides, in his condition, completely crippled, to say, I want to go and create this change. He had a very entrepreneurial question at his heart. The question, if you ask his friends at the time, he would always say that if McDonald's can take hamburgers everywhere, I want to take eyesight everywhere. Very entrepreneurial question, and yet his pursuit was always something much deeper, was always about uplifting that common man, was about changing the life of that village woman, was about, if you read his journals, he always talks about this fundamental idea of how can I be a better instrument of service? How can we be a better instruments of service? Of course, Arvind Eye Hospitals goes on to touch millions of lives, world's largest network of eye hospitals. Everyone at Harvard has to, do their case study as they come in for the last 18 years, I think, longest standing case study in the history of Harvard. So remarkable social change, but it was social first, entrepreneurship that followed in service to that. This is a man whom I also have deep respect for, Ishwar Patel, and that's also his wife in the back, Vasudha Patel. And Ishwar Kaka, as I call him, he was in 5th grade when his teacher started a clean street competition. This was many years ago in a small city of Unja in Gujarat. And he's doing this clean street competition, and he's sweeping the streets. And this village woman comes up to him, and he says, Isha, you're now an untouchable. What are you doing? You can't touch those instruments. She says she takes a little water from the top of her head, touches her golden earrings, sprinkles it on him, and he says, okay, you're clean now, but don't ever make that mistake again. Now this guy in 5th grade goes to his teacher and he says, what kind of world do we live in? They have this deep dialogue, and at the end of the dialogue, Ishwar Patel says, if our instruments are untouchable, what's going to happen to our humanity? How can we rid humanity of this deep chasm that we have created? He dedicates his whole life to this. Whole life. He himself, his organization, created more than 400,000 toilets. He started over 100 organizations. He has reshaped the face of sanitation in a country like India. He just passed away a couple years ago. But incredible guy. Both of these people have received the highest honors, have received the highest, have done remarkable social change work in the world, yet their motivation was not just, I want impact. Their motivation was something much deeper than that. So what is it at the intersection of these things that puts the oomph in the social? And that's what I want to really focus on. The way I look at it, there are three key things, three spheres of social that every social entrepreneur has to address and does address. First is awareness. Of course, you have to raise awareness about the issue that you're combating. Now, this becomes very easy in the days of the internet, but there's also an edge. Well, the good news, this is actually some very interesting data that Facebook releases every single day on peace.facebook.edu. And they talk about friendships that are made across warring regions, across conflicted areas of the world. This is, in the last 24 hours, 476,682 people across India and Pakistan became friends. And that's great. But we also know that this kind of thing is loose ties. And we need a lot more than loose ties to change the world. I don't know how many of you guys have heard of Santiago Swallow. Santiago Swallow, as you can see over there, is a defining face for the millennial generation. He has been to TEDx. He's coming out with a book. He has spoken at South by Southwest. If you go online, you'll see he's on Wikipedia. And he's got 85,000 something followers. And not only that, like all those famous people on Twitter, he's got a little check next to it, which means he's verified. Except that Santiago Swallow doesn't exist. And the guy who started this wrote a little blog piece last week, and he says, how I became an internet celebrity for $68. He goes on, he finds a name at the service, he goes on and he buys from like the online thrift store, 50,000 followers, and he builds a website. He has this service called Twitter Adder that takes a bunch of subjects and predicates, puts them together, and constantly, automatically just puts it out. And we have an internet sensation. Right? So we see loose ties, awareness is very important, but there's also a depth that is missing that we need to address. So that's the awareness. Awareness alone, of course, isn't going to work until we have impact. Impact is very critical. And we have many examples of people creating solid, tangible, measurable, quantifiable impact. This is one example, Tom's Shoes. They say, hey, if you buy one pair of my shoes, I'll give another pair to those who don't have shoes. Sounds like a very good thing. This is their December campaign. We want to go hit 30,000 pairs of shoes, so 30,000 children in Ethiopia who otherwise wouldn't have shoes, and they're running, and there's glass. They might get hurt. They might get they might get a disease. So many things. Sounds like a noble thing, but sometimes this also has an edge. Right? This is a great story. These are the feet of Tarahumara Indians. Now, these guys run in pretty much their flip-flops. I don't even know if those are called flip-flops. Whatever handmade things those are that are nameless. And by itself, you say, well, okay, so these guys run in these flip-flops. What's the big deal? Except in the mid-1990s, there's an ultra-marathon race. And so these guys all get together and they run over 100 miles in the Death Valley heat. It's grueling. It's intense. It's a couple days of constant running. Very few people are cut out for this kind of stuff. In the mid-90s, a couple of these guys from the Tarahumara tribe in Mexico show up. And you can imagine, right? Like a bunch of people in their sneakers and got their outfit, and then you got a bunch of these guys. And people look at them and say, who are these guys? Like, are you in the race or what's going on? They run. And it's sunset at one point, and they decide to stop running. And they're looking at the sunset, and other people are like, this is a race, man. You can't stop and look at the sun. They're like, no, this is Father Son. We need to pay our respects. So everyone's super confused. It's like, who are these guys? Except they end up getting first place. Not only that, they beat the world record. And not only that, Christopher McDougall, who really was this guy who was having knee problems, says maybe there's something to running bare feet. And he starts the whole movement, New York Times best-selling book, Born to Run, and now you have these Vibrams, which are kind of like either, I don't know if they're socks or shoes or what they are in between, you know. And he's started this whole movement of bare feet running, right? Here in the US. And now it's a big market because Vibrams, you know, everybody wants those Vibrams. So you look at that and you say, well, we did have impact, but what kind of impact? I mean, you're giving them shoes, but maybe we have to study the impact of the impact. So these are questions that you arise at. You still need impact, but we also have to look at its edge. And so here's the third just transformation, which is inner transformation. These are Marines. Everyone probably in this room knows about meditation, has heard of meditation, has perhaps seen some research on mindfulness, which is now very popular. It's on the cover of most major magazines these days. And now even the Marines, you know, the toughest guys in the Army are meditating because they realize that if you go on your interior and if you deepen your awareness and you purify your mind, it actually gives you a lot of assets, a lot of resources that you otherwise you wouldn't have access to. So this also has an edge, of course, is in the sense that, you know, here you have this guy, you take your self-obsessive nature and like, I'm just going to meditate. I don't really care what happens in the world. And there must be some cooler infinity that I can be a part of. So you just get kind of self-obsessed with yourself. It's an edge. It's an edge of meditation. It's an edge of doing the work of transformation. But what is most inspiring about these three circles is what happens at the intersection. Right? If I am a smoker and you show me what happens to my lungs when I'm smoking, that's awareness. That's not going to change my behavior. If you give me nicotine patches, that might get me out of my smoking habit. That's impact. But how do I get out of my pattern of addiction altogether? That's transformation. So you put all of these three things together, and what is that intersection? Right? Awareness could be education, impact could be activism, transformation could be meditation, but what is that in between? Didn't have a word, so we call it giftivism. Not activism, which is me against you, giftivism, which is all of us going to the next level. And the core question in this context that giftivism points us to, that the center of all three of those circles points us to, is this: how do we design to externalize benefit? Entrepreneurs are very good at asking the question, how do we externalize the cost? Not my problem if I dump paint in the ocean. Somebody else will do it. But how do you externalize benefit? How do you even create an ecosystem that says, I want to externalize benefit? And if you look at some of the greatest entrepreneurs that have shaped the last social entrepreneurs that have shaped the last decade, last century, these folks: Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Dalai Lama, Aung San Suu Kyi, Cesar Chavez, Nelson Mandela, list goes on. And all these people were working, doing all. And that's inspiring. But now the question is, how do we create more Gandhis in the world? That's a daunting task. Except that we live in a very different world than the world that created these superheroes. We now live in a world, what we call the Gandhi 3.0 era. Gandhi 1.0 was Gandhiji himself. Right? One of him, many of us. Right? One to many. I love him. He's amazing. I want to be like him some lifetime. Then there's Vinoba. Inspiring story. If you don't know about him, I suggest you look him up. Really inspiring story. He just went from village to village, inspiring generosity. And his model was one-to-one. And now we live in a time of Gandhi 3.0, which is many to many, which is what we see in nature all the time. Right? For those of you that are mathematically oriented, you can see the red line, yellow line, and the green line. The one-to-many has a certain kind of impact. One-to-one, much more. Group-forming networks, many-to-many, have a far greater value. So maybe 10 years ago, I would have had to convince you of the power of all this. But now, it's obvious. 1947, see Gandhi on the cover of Time magazine. Vinoba, 1953. And January 2007, the person of the year is you. You in the sense that any one person has now the capacity to unleash all of this. So this is what we call a shift from the ego system to ecosystem. This is what's working these days in all the major movements of the world. This was the Gandhi 1.0 model. Everything goes through me. I'm the boss. I have the vision. I know the right answer. Right? And all nodes point to me and then go back out. It was effective to a certain degree, not that effective. Gandhi 2.0 was much better. And Gandhi 3.0 was rocking. Right? This is ecosystem. This is no longer the ecosystem. It's just ecosystem's just outdated in comparison to what the ecosystem can provide. So now in this 3.0 world, the real question is, so ServiceSpace is an organization that I run. Well, some of you might know it by the earlier name of Charity Focus. We realized we weren't doing charity and we weren't focused either, so what the heck, we changed our name. We hold space, it's an incubator of a lot of generosity-driven projects. And we hold space in 3 key areas. Again, they coincide with our key 3 circles. First is inner space, Kung Fu Panda, where your inner transformation actually ends up being pretty key to the whole. I have a bunch of smile cards. I never leave without it. Smile cards say, go out and do a small act of kindness. It's small. In the larger impact of things, it may not matter. But what it does is, let's say you pay toll for the car behind you, you pick up your neighbor's trash, or you leave someone flowers. A smile card says, you don't know who did this, but pay it forward. Keep the ripple going. And what's the ripple effect? Well, there's one thing about the external ripple effect, but there's another about the internal ripple effect. I've been to schools where I've spoken, and a kid, true story, a kid goes out and immediately does an act of kindness, and I had told them, forget about what happens on the outside, pay attention to what happens on the inside. And this kid comes back crying. And there are so many stories of the power of this inner transformation. So you hold inner space. We also hold outer space. Karma Kitchen in the Valley, probably a lot of you have heard of this restaurant, where you walk into this restaurant and your check reads 0. It's 0 because someone before you has paid for your meal and you get to pay forward for people after you. Again, the economy is completely confused, right? Because if you look at the small box of entrepreneurship that we're usually in, it's like, oh, people are greedy. But can you create a context that appeals to their higher aspirations? Right? That was the experiment with Karma Kitchen, and we were just talking about it. We've done that with all kinds of things. Even a rickshaw driver in India runs his rickshaw on a pay-it-forward basis. Completely different way to tackle things like corruption. And of course, awareness, which is online. And you have things like dailygood.org and karmatube.org that spread this message to millions of people. Right? Not this message, all good messages, all positive messages that don't necessarily have a monetization model. So this is what we do. But in summary, right, the big question of our triad, which is you look at the intersection of awareness, impact, and transformation. Not just awareness by itself, not just impact by itself, not just transformation by itself, but all 3 of them. And you look at all 3 of those in a movement, in an era like today, in a 3.0 era, and you ask this question, and I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this at TiE. I'm going to use the 4-letter word, which is love. Okay? How do you catalyze the Gandhi 3.0 movement in service to love? Right? In service to our shared humanity? How do you uplift everybody? Not just create a world that works for some, but a world that works for all, which was the whole Gandhian ideal of the Sarvodaya movement. And this is the question. And you have to inevitably, if you are of an open heart, you will understand this, but inevitably you'll have to prioritize. Anyone who's done anything practical will have to say, well, how much is awareness, how much impact, and how much transformation? And if you study people like Gandhi, you realize that he pointed us to an answer to things like this. And he said the point of greatest leverage in doing this is inner transformation. He didn't say, go out and preach the change you wish to see in the world. He did not say, go out and create the impact you wish to see in the world. Instead, he said, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. And why would he say that? He cared. He cared for the poorest man. He cared for impact. He wanted to uplift people. And yet, he also wanted to be the change. And he asked everyone that if you really care for changing the world on the outside, you must be that change. So, thank you all, and I'm happy to be here.